You could surround me with animals and I'd be happy. And yet there are people in my life that I might forget sometimes that they're important to me, but they are. And, this book is about those relationships, even the ones that, that seemed like they were horrible, they were important. They defined me, they made me. Any of that happening, I would not be me. I'm not, this may sound insane, especially if you've read the book, but, I'm not sorry that any of that happened because, I'm, pretty happy that I'm me.
Welcome back to AudioLife, the podcast where we tell your story in your voice. I'm your host today, Carrie Purcell, and today you're going to hear part 2 of my conversation with author Jules Delorme, talking about his most recent book, I Heard the Crow Before I Was Born. Now, if you didn't hear part 1 of our conversation, this is a perfect time to hit pause and go back 1 episode. For the rest of you, let's dig in. Now, so Dalton, your stepfather, you refer in the book to him as your real father.
Yeah.
And he was somebody who evidently was trying to protect your mother, but also trying to protect you kids.
Yeah. He, I really, because, I was struggling with this book and struggled through my adulthood because when I joined the Army, maybe the best thing I did was when I joined the Army, I didn't tell him or my mother or any of my family what I was doing.
Okay.
And for 3 years, they didn't hear from me. I didn't hear from them.
The first time you disappeared. Can you talk about disappearing? So this was the first time?
Yeah, I did it many times.
Okay.
But it might have been the smartest thing I did because I gained perspective. Like I said, he would, go around the house calling me,
Yeah.
joking, calling me names, calling me idiot because I did a lot of stupid things. Because, not only do I have Asperger's, I'm dyslexic. So I would crash into things. I still do a lot of stupid things. And he would, scream at me, as I told you before this interview, he would scream at me, how could somebody so smart be so stupid?
Yeah.
And, we had a difficult relationship because I was a weird kid and angry. I hated everybody. And, so I wasn't easy. I'm still not easy. So, I didn't know until many years later how I felt about him because it wasn't our relationship, from the outside. And from my perspective, he did not seem like a good father, but he was.
Yeah.
Because he tried. He stayed and he tried.
Yeah.
He really tried to love me, and I wasn't easy. He did his best.
Yeah.
And, as much as he called me names, and racial names, I hated him because he was white. And that's just as much as, racism as, his racism. So, it goes both ways.
Yeah.
So, much of what I learned about being a good man, I learned from him.
Yeah.
I don't know if I put this in the book, but I remember this so vividly that one day when we were living in one of the projects in Sparrowways, waking up and, he had been an alcoholic. He read in a newspaper about, someone killing one of his children when he was drunk.
Yes. You mentioned that.
So he restricted himself to drinking, there used to be 2 hockey nights in Canada, Wednesday and Saturday. So he only drank on the hockey nights in Canada. And that's when my mom would drink too. And there was a difference because she was an angry person, but she was a more angry drunk. He was a sentimental drunk. He was as a human being, he was German, so he was not sentimental at all. But when he got drunk, he was very sentimental. But I remember waking up one night and, my mother being on top of him and just beating the living hell out of him, like punching him in the face so he's bloody, and him not fighting back and being ashamed of him and thinking, why don't you fight back? You're not a man. And now I'm looking back and thinking, that's what a man is.
Yes. So I remember the story from the book. I don't remember you reflecting that you were ashamed of him. If you did, I don't remember that. I remember you pointing out that he didn't fight back, and that he didn't fight back because of this story he had heard or read of accidentally killing somebody, and that was I don't know how you frame it in the book, but I remember it being held up as an example of goodness, an example of protection and self-restraint.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because the chapter on Dalton comes very late in the book. I think it's actually the second last chapter. And we get a view, we hear over and over my real father. We hear the respect that you have for him, the love, admiration, the role that he played over and over. And it isn't until the very end of the book that we, in his chapter, start to hear that there was some tension. And you've said on this podcast and in the book, you think that you were difficult. You've said a lot of different aspects about, why that tension may have been there. But we don't hear that throughout the book. You've at the time of writing, up until his chapter, you show us all of the understanding and acceptance and perspective that you got to see that he was a good man and an example to you.
Yeah, I think, when I was editing the book, I purposely moved that to the end of the book because it wasn't until very late in my life that I really started to struggle with how I felt about him and how important that lesson was. That, he could be this contradiction.
Yes.
Possibly my favorite quote of all time is the Walt Whitman one that, do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. And he is, my father was a contradiction.
Yes.
And, I think all human beings, the best human beings, are contradictions. The ones you should not trust are the ones who never contradict themselves.
That's an interesting thought.
It was the same with my mother, though. Because, and literally she was, schizophrenic. So she, very much a contradiction. But, I didn't realize until the end of my life, when I told her I loved her, I didn't even mean it. And yet, long after she was dead, I realized I meant it.
Yeah.
And
you meant it, and you had the chance to say it.
Yeah.
In a timing that that was your last chance, in a timing that mattered.
Yeah, and that's as to go back to what I was saying earlier. There's been these gifts, and I don't know why I've been given these gifts, but I have.
Yes.
Because the same thing happened with my father. where just before he died, like, in fact, a day before he died, I went and saw him and I said, everything, Dad, I love you, and everything I know about being a man comes from you.
Yeah.
I don't know why I've been, because my sister was in the middle of a fight with my mother when my mother died. And, it haunted her. It haunted my sister until the day she died. And, somehow, for some reason, I'm constantly given these gifts. I don't even believe in closure. And yet I'm given these gifts.
You've had, yeah.
Of
Yeah,
these
isn't that
moments,
interesting?
And then, and yet people would look at my life and go, you've had the most horrible life. Yeah, but, I've also had the most beautiful moments, and, and one of my other favorite quotes, because I think it was Rumi that first said it, but I love that, Leonard Cohen song is, the cracks are how the light gets in, and I've had a lot of cracks. So, maybe that's, why the light gets in.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let me ask you. So, your book talks a lot about relationships and the lives that your life has encountered, and how important that is. How you have. I was just looking back for a quote, and I won't go there. We'll probably come closer to this near the end. But you do say, there are so many people that I left out, so many names that I merely mentioned who deserve so much more, so many stories left untold. How do you encompass a life? How do you encompass all the lives that my life came in contact with and was affected by and had an effect on? So many people worrying about mattering, but I look back and I'm horrified by how much I mattered, even though I tried so hard, or thought I tried. Perhaps I lied to myself, maybe, like all human beings, and I wanted to matter, and I still want to matter. And I'll stop for a minute just to say that the focus in your book really is about people. You mention that there's so many other stories, so many things that have happened to you, and you touch on just a few of them, but you don't go into depth on a lot of these experiences that you've had that other people might talk about. You've had these big experiences. You do talk about one motor vehicle accident that we may talk about that had a big impact on your life, but there were apparently many more, including motorcycle accidents. You went off for a while to get into theater and film and do all of these interesting things in your career, which you don't really talk about. You allude to just a little bit that all of these other events and stories have happened, but that's not your life story. That's not the memoir that you leave on these pages. I want to ask about some of that because we have a chance to share some things that aren't in the book in this conversation, right? To give people some of those stories maybe, and some of the rest of the experiences you've had. We paused coming out of the Army paying for education for you for university. And we didn't explicitly talk about this, but you were always very good at school. You were smart and you did well in school. Even if you missed periods of time, you could go back and pick up whatever was happening and do well because you had a mind for that. So what was it like to get to university? Like, what did you study? What opportunities did that give you? Tell us about that.
Well, to start with, it's early on in my life, I had this horrible experience in Catholic school where this teacher, because I was dyslexic, and I was, odd, she decided, back then they called it retarded. And she decided they were going to put me in a retarded school because, I wrote backwards. And my mother, largely because of her ego, because, no kid of hers could be retarded.
Yeah.
Pulled me out of the Catholic school. Well, first of all, she took me to the hospital and she had me tested, what the doctor told her was my IQ score was 8 points less than Einstein, which is ridiculous because Einstein never actually had his IQ test. I don't know why they said that, but she went around telling everybody. So she pulled me out of the Catholic school. She stuck me in a public school, and the teacher, Mrs. Kimberly, less than an hour with me, said he's dyslexic. So being smart was very important to me because, that label of retarded. And my stepfather, my real father, the one horrible thing he did was he would call me dummy a lot because I said a lot, as I said, I did a lot of stupid things. And for a lot of my early years, I would go absolutely ballistic if somebody said the word dummy to me. So when I got out of the Army, nobody in my family had ever gone to university.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to go to university because no one in my family had. But I also was extremely curious. But I was also curious about what the hell was wrong with me. So I studied psychology. And I remember sitting in the class and looking around and going, everybody in here's nuts. Because we all wanted to know what the hell was wrong with us.
Yeah, this is in a psychology class. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I started, majored in psychology, minored in theater. It's odd being, having Asperger's because, the last thing I would think was, I would do theater. But,
yeah,
it kind of forced me into this place where I was, I had to do what was most uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
But I also started writing plays. Interestingly enough, here's a funny story. So I wrote a play that got put up twice called Dog. I called it Dog because, I love dogs, and the quality I love about dogs is that their love is unconditional.
Yes.
And there is a character in the play that, his love is unconditional, and he is destroyed because his love is unconditional. Because that's what the world does. There were two independent newspapers at the time, I Magazine and Now Magazine. They both came to review the play. Now Magazine interviewed me. And before, we put up Dog, I had directed a cross-gender version of Hamlet. So Now Magazine asked me how it was different directing Dog than directing Hamlet. And I said, jokingly, well, this time I'm directing a much better writer. They put that in, but they did not say I was joking. But because they interviewed me, they said that, because the two, what happens to the lead character is he's traded off between these two women who destroy him. And they said it was, the play was horribly misogynistic. I Magazine, on the other hand, did not interview me, and they took my name to be female.
Oh, interesting.
And they said the play was a brilliant feminist statement. So,
wow.
That's... At any rate, so I ended up studying psychology. I wrote my final paper on who Jack the Ripper was.
Wow.
From a psychological point of view, because I still am very interested in, the most abnormal psychology, because, 2 people in my family have actually killed people.
Okay.
And I wanted to know, 2 people that I knew quite well and loved.
Mm.
And I wanted to know what it was that drove them to do it.
Yeah.
When people in my life have asked me, could you kill someone? And I've always said yes.
Mm.
Absolutely. I've been, right on the verge.
Yeah.
And I know I can. That's, that I haven't is, just self-control.
Yeah.
And, so
Where does the self-control come from?
like I said, what Abraham Lincoln said about his stepmother and his mother being the better angels, in his life, I think I've had, the better angels. My dada, Roger, there's these people behind, standing with me that, tell me, that have always
Yes.
been there, that coach me to do better things.
Yeah.
And hopefully, I've tried to be a better angel for, people in my family and in my life.
Yeah.
And now for a word from our sponsors. Ready to share your stories and life philosophy? Or capture those of a parent or grandparent? Or maybe a corporate package is right for you to build connection across your workforce and add value to your clients. Visit audiolife.io today to learn more. Our listeners will get 10% off using discount code GIFT10 and order number AudioLife Podcast. AudioLife, where memories find their voice.
So after your psychology degree, you did apply your theater minor in multiple ways. What did you do for work? Did you apply your psychology degree in a career capacity, or is it something that you apply in other ways that you continue as an interest? And
No, absolutely not. I got to the end of the psychology degree. I got my bachelor's.
Yeah.
And then I got, I realized, I don't want to be a therapist at all. I'd be the world's worst therapist. I loved the theater stuff. I got into acting, acted in some horrible films. Unfortunately, most of my best work was, in theater, and I don't know why. I acted in some horrible films. I wrote some horrible films. I had some horrible experiences there. And then decided, I'd better get out of that. I moved to LA for a couple of years, joined a rock band. I don't think I mentioned that in the book because that was stupid.
Okay.
It was fun, but it was stupid.
How was it stupid?
Well, it was just, it was just unbelievably shallow. It was, it's hard to look at me now and see it, but if there's people that have pictures of me with, this long, beautiful hair, the 80s.
Yeah.
I was that 80s, glam band in one of those 80s. We had a record deal and everything. That's when the car accident happened.
Wow.
And, ruined everything. But, the best thing that ever happened is it woke me up.
Yeah.
I was a complete a-hole, just a complete shallow a-hole. I was about to become the big rock star, and, I thought that was the world.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, because, all those people that I thought were my friends, they disappeared.
Yeah.
When I got in that car accident. And, then I realized...
It's a hard lesson to learn.
Yeah.
And from the car accident, which you talk about in the book, but for anybody who hasn't read it yet, it was a severe car accident, and you were told that you would never walk again. Yeah.
So it happened. I don't think I go into great detail in the book, but what actually happened is, so I was with this guy who, he was kind of a roadie, but, I thought he was my friend. And we were in Texas, and we were basically, it was a car, of course, a Trans Am that I had bought. And we picked up these two girls. We went to a drive-in movie theater. And he asked if he could drive because he was trying to impress this girl. So I let him drive. The girls went for popcorn. And I got out of the back seat, got in the front seat to talk to him. He must have been playing with the ignition or something. And the car just kind of took off and went through a fence right into a brick wall. I flew through the window, and I tucked, from years of martial arts and everything. I tucked and smashed into the brick wall with my knees. And I remember lying on the ground, covered in blood because I went through, a glass window.
Yeah.
And, I couldn't see or open my eyes. And I remember somebody standing over me with a thick Texas accent going, "He's dead. I'm telling you, he's dead." And I wanted to tell him, to tell him I'm not dead, but I couldn't. And I was thinking, well, maybe I am dead.
Yeah.
That was the last thing I remember. And then I woke up and they, in a hospital in Texas with no insurance, which, I spent, they took all my money because I had no car insurance as well. So it took, I made quite a bit of money with the rock band and lost all my money. So Roger and Laura, who I mentioned in the book, in the chapter to her, this girl I treated like crap while I was in the rock band, but, somehow just, forgave me. And, the two of them took me back up to Toronto where I did it, didn't need, insurance. And the doctors were saying, he'll never walk again. And they, Roger and Laura said, no, you're going to walk again. And they, I tried to kill myself a whole bunch of times because I couldn't picture a world where I didn't walk. And I couldn't picture myself being useful where I didn't walk. And got to they forced me to exercise and do everything, and got to the point where I could walk with a cane. Doctors were then said, "You're never going to walk without a cane." Roger and Laura said, "You're going not only are you going to walk again without a cane, you're going to walk again. You're going to run." And I didn't believe them, but they forced me, and eventually I was running.
Yeah.
They're both dead. And yet I'm still here. So.
And Laura's death was by car accident as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what that, she died on the, that weekend I'd finally decided that I was going to propose to her. And I had a dream that weekend that she was being eaten by a giant bulldog, and it was a Mack truck, which, that hit her car, which, the symbol is bulldog. That nearly killed me because, the loss of her, the loss of Roger.
So who did you have at that point in your life? Because you had been through this terrible car accident, this change of all the people that had been around you weren't there. Roger and Laura came back. Who was left?
Well, it didn't appear at that time like I had anybody. There was, there's been periods in my life where it just appeared like I was all alone. And there's been periods in my life where I've sat there, going, why the hell am I still alive and they're dead?
Mm-hmm.
Survivor's guilt, because, and, it's, I've tried to be killed. I've gone out there and, gotten into fights and done things that where I was trying to get killed. And I'm harder to kill than a Russian monk. I don't know why I'm still alive. But then I look back and I go, there were people. I just didn't see them. I didn't recognize them.
Yeah.
And just, recognizing those people is, they're not always, big, you don't always see them, I have friends that are, like today that, are not, I don't, I mention their names, but I don't, they don't get a chapter.
Yeah.
That they're there. They're part of my life. And, there's, I'm not alone. You're never alone.
Yeah.
Okay. So the irony of the book is, that, that I realized as I was editing it is that the book is entirely about relationships.
Yes.
It's, even though it's, technically a memoir, it's, it's about relationships, which, having Asperger's is, most people who know me would tell you that I'd be that Burgess Meredith character in, the Twilight Zone. If everybody in the world died, I'd be the happiest person on earth.
Yeah, interesting.
And yet, my life has been defined by my relationships.
Yeah.
And, I've always had those people in my life, despite myself.
Yeah.
And I still do. And, it was important that I write this book, not just for other people, but for myself, to remind myself that those people were there.
Yeah.
That they were part of and they made me who I was. And they continue to make me who I was. Like, I mentioned, that I just mentioned their names. Yeah. But, Dr. Norma Dunnick, for instance, I talk to her on a regular basis, and she just, because, we make jokes about, the relationship between, because even though, people tend to see the, indigenous people as monolith, the relationship between an Inuit and a Mohawk, our people, we ate each other, literally. We're we spent time killing each other. So, the fact that we have a relationship is funny to us. But, she lifts me up, and we lift each other up. And, my friend, Alana, every single day, I'm living in her house, in her basement, and every single day she comes down and checks on me. Yeah. Because, physically I'm not capable. I have seizures. I have, as you just saw, I have neurological conditions. And she comes down and, she just says, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. And, even though, you can stick me in the woods and I'd survive.
Yeah.
Just fine. And, you can surround me with animals and I'd be happy. And yet, without, there are people in my life that, I might not know, I might forget sometimes that they're important to me, but they are.
Yeah.
And, that this book is about those relationships, even the ones that, that seemed like they were horrible.
Mm-hmm.
They were important. They defined me. They made me. Any of that happening, I would not be me.
Yes.
I'm not, this may sound insane, especially if you've read the book, but, I'm not sorry that any of that happened. Because, I'm, pretty happy that I'm me.
Yeah, I get it. I'm not one of those people. There is heaviness in the book. There's violence. There's trauma. I'm not one of those people that thinks you're crazy for saying that, because all of those pieces do make us who we are. And to imagine it playing out differently and a different version of yourself existing is, that's not better.
Yeah, exactly. That's,
I wanted to ask you why it was important for you to write this book and to write it now. And I think you've just so eloquently summarized the answer to that and so much more. But before we wrap, I will still give you a chance. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't touched upon?
Well, I did have the feeling that, which is, why I wrote that part that you read, that there's so much that's not in the book.
Yeah.
Because there is so much more life. But, how do you really summarize a life? How do you encapsulate any life? And, again, going back to that Walt Whitman phrase, I am large, I contain multitudes. I think any person that you meet, I try and remind myself that, of that, every single person I meet is that large.
Yes.
That, they contain multitudes, and if you take the time, that's, that's, there are so many layers to that person. There's nobody, there are people that, make themselves simple.
Sure.
And, those are the people that, you should be very wary of.
Those that don't have the contradictions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This one, the memoir was written without an agent. Now I have a wonderful agent, and he's he now has 2 pieces that I've written, and they much fiction, much larger, much more insane.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because they're not memoirs, so I was much more free to go crazy with them.
Based on any little bit of reality? You don't have to answer.
One of them I set out. I am more than a little bit insane. So, the one of them I set out to write an indigenous noir, and it ended up, don't ask me how, but it ended up being an indigenous Western horror.
Interesting. Huh. Okay.
So
bringing some of your psychology thesis back into play and trying to understand some. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, it's just, but there's also, because I don't know if you noticed this in the memoir itself, but there's a way of telling stories. There's a way that Indigenous people, not just North American Indigenous, but all Indigenous people have of telling stories that is more circular, more of a spiral. You know, it's not a straight line. And there's not a beginning and an end.
Yeah.
And there is more of a cloudy way of telling stories.
Okay.
That lends itself well to horror, like indigenous horror, like we have. When I was 6 years old, my sister was dating an usher in the city of Cornwall, and she was supposed to be babysitting me. Well, she was supposed to be taking care of me, and she plunked me down again in the Roxy Theater in the front row to watch The Exorcist while she went off with them. I did not sleep for 2 weeks because if you're indigenous, that stuff is real.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and that is still, you know, because, you know, spirits and, you know, all of that stuff is real.
Yeah.
For us. And, you know, like when I speak about my grandmother and my, you know, those are good spirits. Yes. But we have, you know, the idea of the spirit world is very, very real. We live in the spirit world.
Yeah.
You know, and so, it ending up as a horror, I think it's been something I've been wanting to tell for a very long time.
Interesting. Okay.
And wanting to explore.
And when does it publish? Do you know yet?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know because it's you know, it's a monster. It's like it's a big one. It's like it's gonna be a tough edit because it's, you know, it's told in a very Rashomon kind of way, first of all. And, you know, like I said, it's, you know, I don't know. I will say this, my agent's the people who have read it are very excited about it. And I don't know, it's either the best thing I've ever written or the worst.
Yeah. Got it.
You know that feeling?
Yeah.
So, you know, that's something to
yeah, it's exciting.
That I'm looking forward to working on.
Okay.
I'm still going to write that noir, though.
Yeah. All right. Good. So I think I said this earlier, you're very easy to talk to, and I could keep asking you questions all day, but you've been very generous with your time. You've been very open and vulnerable with everything that you shared in your book, but also in our conversation. And it's been a pleasure, and I just want to thank you.
Thank you. You've been very easy to talk to as well. You know.
You've been listening to AudioLife Memoirs, the podcast where we share your story in your voice. I've been your host today, Carrie Purcell, speaking with Jules Delorme. And if you like what you heard, don't forget to rate the show. That helps others find us, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.
If you like what you heard today, consider recording your own AudioLife private podcast or giving one to a loved one for a unique and memorable gift. Today, AudioLife listeners will receive 10% off using discount code GIFT10 and order number AudioLife Podcast. Also, remember to rate our show and subscribe so you'll never miss an episode.